In the first year of a 30-year mortgage, 82 cents of every dollar you pay goes to interest, not to principal, not to equity. The Federal Reserve has documented this. In New York, where the median home in the city costs $730,000, closing costs are the second highest in the nation, and the combined state and local tax burden is the highest of all 50 states. That structural reality carries a cost most buyers never fully calculate before signing. As of early 2026, the average home value in New York City is $812,000, according to Zillow. The median sale price sits at $730,000 as of March 2026, up 3.5% from the prior year. In Manhattan, that median reaches $1.3 million. New York is the sixth most expensive housing market in the country, running roughly 90% above the national median. Those are the prices people are financing with 30-year mortgages right now. New York's closing costs are not like everywhere else. Before the amortization schedule even begins, buying in New York costs significantly more than buying almost anywhere else in the country. The average closing costs on a home purchase in New York are $23,500, according to Rocket Mortgage data covering August 2024 through August 2025. That is 62% more than the national average of $14,400, and the second highest in the nation, behind Washington, D.C. But the statewide average understates what buyers in the 5 boroughs actually face, because New York City layers additional transaction taxes onto the closing table that do not exist in most other markets. Buyers purchasing a condo or a house are subject to a mortgage recording tax. On a mortgage of $500,000 or more, that tax is 1.925% of the loan amount. On an $800,000 mortgage, that is $15,400, due at closing before a single monthly payment has been made. Co-op purchases are exempt because co-op financing is structured as a share loan rather than a real property mortgage, which is one reason co-ops remain a significant part of the city's housing stock despite the complexity of their approval process. Purchases at $1 million or more trigger the mansion tax paid by the buyer. Despite the name, this applies to any residential property: a condo, a co-op, a townhouse, not just large estates. In Manhattan, $1 million may represent a one-bedroom apartment. The tax starts at 1% of the purchase price. A purchase at exactly $1 million generates a $10,000 tax bill. A purchase at $999,000 generates nothing. That is a hard cliff, not a gradual slope, and it is one reason buyers and their attorneys negotiate carefully near that threshold. When you add it together, a buyer purchasing a $750,000 home in New York City should expect to pay between $22,500 and $45,000 in closing costs, according to DeFalco Realty's 2026 breakdown. On a $1.5 million condo with a $1.2 million mortgage, the range rises to between $75,000 and $100,000. That money is spent before the mortgage clock starts. How a 30-year mortgage amortizes. A mortgage amortizes on a front-loaded schedule. The bank recovers its interest cost first. Principal reduction comes later, significantly later. In year one of a 30-year mortgage, according to Federal Reserve data, only 17.6% of the monthly payment is applied to principal. The remaining 82.4% pays interest. That ratio shifts slowly. By year 15, the midpoint of the loan, 40% of the payment goes to principal. The crossover point, where more than half of each payment goes to principal, does not arrive until year 20. In the final year of the loan, 97% of the payment goes to principal. But by that point, the borrower has been making payments for 3 decades. The reason this matters for New York buyers specifically is a behavioral pattern that is well documented nationally. The average time a buyer stays in a home is 8 years. The median is 13. Most borrowers sell before the amortization schedule reaches the stage where equity accumulation meaningfully accelerates. At the 8-year mark on a 30-year mortgage, 60% of all payments made have gone to interest. The borrower has spent 8 years making payments and owns relatively little of the property compared to what has been paid out. At New York prices, the dollar figures attached to that pattern are not small. What the interest actually costs. On a $400,000 loan, below the median for most New York City purchases, at 6.25% over 30 years, the monthly payment is approximately $2,463. Total interest paid over the life of that loan is $486,633. The same loan on a 15-year term at 5.5% carries a monthly payment of $3,268. That is $805 more per month. Total interest on the 15-year, $188,300. The difference in total interest between the two terms is $298,000. On a $320,000 loan, representing a $400,000 purchase with 20% down, the 30-year at 6.5% runs $2,023 monthly, with total interest of $408,143 based on a November 2025 analysis. The 15-year at 6% runs $2,701 monthly, with total interest of $166,062. The interest savings from choosing the 15-year term, $242,000. On a $1 million mortgage at 7%, the 30-year monthly payment is $6,586, with total interest over 30 years of $580,894. The 15-year monthly payment is $8,932, with total interest of $329,654. Choosing the 30-year over the 15-year on that loan costs an additional $251,240. For a $1 million mortgage in a city where $1 million is a routine transaction price, that difference is not incidental. It is the kind of number that materially affects retirement accounts, college savings, and long-term financial stability. NerdWallet's mortgage calculator frames the general rule clearly. A 15-year fixed-rate mortgage at 6.25% costs $255,519 less in total interest than a 30-year at the same rate. Monthly payments on the 15-year run about 30% higher. That is the trade the borrower is making. The refinancing assumption. A common rationale for choosing a 30-year mortgage is the expectation of refinancing if interest rates decline. The logic is straightforward. Take the lower payment now, and when rates fall, refinance into a shorter term or a lower rate and recover the cost difference. In most housing markets, that calculation is workable. In New York, it is substantially more expensive than borrowers typically expect. Refinancing in New York costs an average of $12,462, according to Rocket Mortgage data. That is the highest average refinancing cost in the nation, 42% above the national average of $8,762. Every refinancing transaction requires that cost to be recouped through monthly savings before any net benefit is realized. In a market where refinancing costs $12,000, the break-even period on a rate reduction is considerably longer than in a state where it costs $8,000. The rate environment adds further context. Rates climbed towards 7% in early 2025, pulled back towards 6% by year-end after the Federal Reserve cut rates 3 times in late 2025, then rose again in early 2026 as policymakers signaled restraint. As of May 22, 2026, the 30-year fixed rate in New York is 6.59%. According to Bankrate, the Federal Reserve has held rates steady with inflation still running above 3% and labor market data coming in stronger than expected. Borrowers who took 30-year mortgages expecting near-term rate relief have not seen it materialize on the timeline they anticipated. The invest the difference argument. A second argument for the 30-year mortgage involves redirecting the monthly payment difference into investments. If a borrower consistently invests the savings between a 15-year and a 30-year payment into an index fund averaging 7% annually, in line with historical stock market performance, the long-term outcome may, in certain scenarios, favor the 30-year. The financial logic is sound in theory. The limitation is behavioral consistency. A lower mandatory payment tends to expand to fill available cash flow rather than flow into investment accounts. The discipline required to redirect that difference every month for 30 years without interruption through job changes, health expenses, family costs, or market downturns is not the reality most borrowers sustain. The 30-year is structured around the argument of flexibility. In practice, that flexibility is often spent rather than invested. Current rates and the alternatives. As of May 22, 2026, the 15-year fixed rate in New York is 5.97%. According to Bankrate, the spread between the 30-year at 6.59 and the 15-year at 5.97 is roughly 0.6%. Freddie Mac's primary mortgage market survey data shows that 15-year rates historically run between 0.5 and 0.75% below 30-year rates. The spread reflects the reduced duration risk the lender assumes on a shorter loan. The borrower on a 30-year term pays for that additional risk through a higher rate applied over a longer period. Borrowers who cannot qualify for a 15-year payment have options that sit between the two standard terms. The 20-year fixed was averaging 6% in New York as of April 2026. Per Zillow, at 0.6% below the 30-year rate, and with a repayment period 10 years shorter, the 20-year reduces total interest paid substantially while keeping monthly payments lower than the 15-year requires. Adjustable-rate mortgages are not currently offering a rate advantage in New York. The average 5/1 ARM was 7.13% in January 2026 per Zillow, higher than the prevailing 30-year fixed rate. Adjustable-rate products are most appropriate when a borrower has a defined plan to sell or refinance before the fixed-rate period expires. In the current rate environment, they do not offer a meaningful discount at entry. A hybrid approach is available for borrowers who need the contractual flexibility of a 30-year loan but want to reduce total interest paid. Taking the 30-year mortgage and voluntarily making payments calculated at the 15-year amortization amount accelerates principal paydown without creating a mandatory obligation that cannot be reduced during a financial disruption. This approach does not capture the lower interest rate available on a true 15-year term, but it addresses the front-loading problem to a meaningful degree while preserving the option to revert to the lower required payment if necessary. The property tax layer. The mortgage payment is one component of what New York homeownership costs. Property taxes are a persistent additional obligation that does not diminish as the mortgage amortizes. New York's effective property tax rate is 1.23%. According to Adams' 2025 data, against a median home price of $672,000. The median annual property tax bill in the state is $3,755, placing New York fourth in the nation for total property taxes paid. In Westchester County, directly north of the city, the average annual property tax bill is $9,003. Buyers who move to Westchester to find lower purchase prices than Manhattan or Brooklyn offers carry a property tax obligation that rivals or exceeds what many buyers face in the city itself. New York's combined state and local tax burden, property taxes, income taxes, and sales and excise taxes combined averaged 13.3% of residents' income over the period from 2020 through 2025, the highest of all 50 states. The state income tax rate reaches 10.9% at the upper bracket for 2025. A 30-year mortgage in New York does not exist in isolation from that tax structure. Every dollar of income used to service the mortgage has already been reduced by a tax environment that is more demanding than any other state in the country. Assistance programs for qualifying buyers. First-time buyers in New York have access to programs that can reduce the upfront cost of entry and, in some cases, access to lower-rate mortgage products that change the 30-year versus 15-year calculation. The State of New York Mortgage Agency, known as SONYMA, offers lower-interest mortgage products through a network of participating lenders for low to moderate income borrowers across the state. The agency's Achieving the Dream program requires a 3% down payment with a minimum of 1% contributed by the borrower. SONYMA programs can be combined with other grant funding and apply to single-family homes, condos, and co-ops. The agency defines first-time homebuyers as those who have not owned a primary residence within the past 3 years. Within New York City, the Home First Down Payment Assistance Program, administered by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, offers qualified buyers up to $100,000 toward down payment and closing costs on 1 to 4 unit properties, condos, or co-ops in any of the 5 boroughs. The Homebuyer Dream program, offered through participating lenders, provided up to $30,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance during its 2025 round. That funding was exhausted before the November 28th deadline. Enrollment for subsequent rounds has historically opened in the late fall of the preceding year. These programs do not eliminate the structural cost difference between mortgage terms. They address the upfront barrier to entry. The amortization math operates the same way regardless of how the down payment was funded. What the full picture looks like. Buyer search activity in Queens neighborhoods, including Sunnyside, Ridgewood, and Long Island City, increased by more than 40% in 2026, according to data published by Alpine Mortgage. These areas have absorbed demand from buyers priced out of Manhattan and Brooklyn. Median prices in New York City remain between $730,000 and $875,000 across property types. The mortgage term chosen in these markets carries the same front-loaded amortization, the same rate spread between a 30-year and a 15-year, and the same transaction cost structure as anywhere else in the city. A 30-year mortgage is not an unsuitable product for every New York buyer. For borrowers who cannot manage the higher monthly payment of a shorter-term loan, it may be the only available path to ownership. The conforming loan limit across most New York counties is $832,750, rising to $1.2 million in certain high-cost areas. At those loan sizes, the difference in monthly payment between a 15-year and a 30-year is substantial, and for many buyers, the lower payment is not a preference. It is a qualification requirement. The decision becomes problematic when it is made without accounting for total cost, not the rate sheet figure, not the monthly payment in isolation, the full 30-year interest expense, the closing costs that run 62% above the national average, the refinancing costs that are the highest in the country, the property taxes, and the statistical likelihood that the property will be sold within 8 to 13 years before the amortization schedule shifts meaningfully in the borrower's favor. In year 1, 82 cents of every mortgage dollar goes to the bank. At the 8-year mark, roughly when the average buyer sells, 60 cents of every dollar paid over that period has gone to interest. In a market where prices run 90% above the national median, where a routine mortgage in the outer boroughs can exceed $600,000, and where transaction costs on both sides of the sale are among the highest in the country, the cumulative dollar value of that imbalance is not marginal. On a $1 million mortgage, it amounts to a difference of $251,000 between a 15-year and a 30-year term. That is not a rounding error. It is a number large enough to retire debt, fund a decade of retirement contributions, or represent a substantial portion of a child's education. The 30-year mortgage offers a lower monthly payment. What it costs to get that lower payment, in New York specifically, is a calculation worth making in full before the closing documents are signed. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Would you choose the lower payment of a 30-year mortgage or pay more each month to save hundreds of thousands in interest long-term? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.